He came to terms with her disappearance a long time ago. His younger sister went missing years ago, and the search has yielded no results. But everything changes in one moment when a man receives a call from an old phone that he thought was lost forever. Her voice was heard on the other end of the line, a voice pleading for help and telling the meeting place. Inner fear and doubts begin to tear him apart. Is it really her? Is it possible that someone, or something, has taken her voice to lure him into a trap hidden in the darkness? Going to the place that sounded from her words, he finds himself on the border between hope and horror. A meeting with the past awaits him, which hides secrets that could become his salvation or a devastating curse. The man stood in front of the old amusement park where his sister had last played as a child. All the memories came flooding back. Her laughter, the array of bright colors and the sunlight that was as warm as her smile. But now everything looked different. Ruined carousels swayed in the wind, and whispers and shadows pierced the night air. He was holding a phone in his hand that he had found under strange circumstances the day before. That call did not leave him alone. The voice on the other end of the line sounded too much like his missing sister's, so much so that doubt dissolved into despair. She said that she needed to be rescued and indicated the place. Although he knew it could be a trap, his heart beat in a rhythm of hope and fear. Step by step, the man headed deep into the park. At every step he heard a soft laugh, like a child's, coming from the old mirror maze. The sounds echoed, making it feel like someone was playing with him. At last he stopped in front of the doors to the maze, which creaked as if awaiting his arrival. "Brother, I'm here," came a voice from the depths of the darkness, and cold tingles ran up his skin. The man sighed and stepped into the middle of the maze. The reflections in the mirrors looked strange. In each of them, he saw himself younger, as if he had gone back in time. In some mirrors, his sister stood next to him, as he remembered her, with playful eyes and a naive smile. But as he looked longer, the smile on her face began to look unnaturally wide, and her eyes darkened into bottomless wells. "Where are you?" he shouted, trying to hide the trepidation in his voice. Silence. Then the call. The phone in his hand came to life again. The feeling of danger was growing. He knew something was watching him and playing with his fears. But it was too late to retreat. The truth was waiting ahead, which could break him or give him a chance for salvation. The voice on the phone grew louder, almost breaking the silence of the labyrinth. "You have to trust me, brother. I'm trapped here. You are the only one who can save me." His heart was pounding. He could not understand what was happening. It was hard to tell if it was his real sister or a trap created by dark forces playing on his desperation. He remembered how he hadn't been able to save her when she disappeared, and his chest tightened with guilt and pain. Now he had a chance to make amends, but the price might be too high. Suddenly, the light in the mirror maze began to flicker. The reflections around him changed. Now instead of him, strange figures with empty eyes appeared there. They watched him, shaking their heads as if mocking. It seemed to him that the mirrors were breathing. Each of them radiated icy coldness. "Why are you hesitating?" The sister's voice rang out again, but now it sounded split, as if superimposed on another. "Do you want to lose me forever?" The man took a step forward, approaching the center of the maze. Darkness thickened around him, and suddenly the mirrors began to crack one after the other. With each blow, there was a feeling that something terrible was closing in on him. Finally, he found himself in front of the only surviving mirror, in which he saw himself and her. The sister looked younger, her eyes full of fear. She reached out her hand from behind the mirror. "Help me, please. I'm stuck here." But something in her expression was wrong. The man felt his own fear intensify. Before he could take even a step, the mirror began to shake, as if someone or something was trying to escape. Suddenly another voice sounded from behind him, cold and alienated. "Don't believe her. It's not her." He turned to see a figure shrouded in shadow. Her presence caused numbness and horror. The man found himself between two choices: to help his sister in the mirror or to retreat. And with every second he felt the trap pulling him deeper and deeper. The man stood between two ghosts from his past, one that begged for help from behind the mirror, and the other that appeared to be the sinister guardian of the labyrinth. Her sister's voice was so piercing that it echoed in his mind, awakening memories and hopes that he had buried long ago. But the cold breath of the shadow behind him squeezed his body like ice chains. "Brother, please don't leave me." The sister reached out her hand again from behind the mirror. Her face was filled with despair, but her eyes shone with a strange light. "It's not her," the hoarse voice of the shadow rang out again, and the man felt his words send a chill through his skin. "This creature lures you, it feeds on your pain. Turn away before it's too late." The man trembled, mustering all his strength to decide on a choice. Trust an unfamiliar shadow or follow the call of the heart. His mind screamed about danger, but in the depths of his soul there was still hope to see his sister alive. Desperation pushed him to decisive action. He took a step towards the mirror and held out his hand. At the same moment, the mirror began to vibrate, and the reflection of the sister suddenly changed. Her face became elongated, her eyes deepened and filled with black gloom. The creature standing before him was no longer the girl he loved. She grimaced in an ugly smile, opening her mouth, from which darkness poured like a thick fog. "You've waited too long," she said mockingly, and her hand gripped his wrist with unearthly force, pulling him inside. "Now you are mine." The man desperately resisted, but the darkness began to suck him. At the same moment, the shadow behind him rushed forward. Her cold fingers burned his skin, shattering the illusion and dispelling the darkness. The shadow hit the mirror and it exploded in shards of light. The shock wave threw the man to the floor, and everything around froze in dead silence. He opened his eyes and saw the shards of the mirror glistening on the floor. The reflection of the sister was no longer there. Instead, there was a shadow in front of him, from which some black substance was oozing. Her form was falling apart. "You saved yourself. And her soul, which was a captive," said the creature, weakening. "But this battle is only the beginning. They will come back, and try again." With those words, the shadow dissolved into the air, leaving the man alone in the middle of the ruins of the mirror maze. He stared at the wreckage, feeling the pain and burden lift from his soul. But now he knew, the game with light and shadow was not over yet. The man stood up, leaning on the shards of the mirror that only a few minutes ago reflected his fears. The feeling of emptiness inside disappeared, but with it came the realization that this was only part of a greater horror lurking in the shadows. The remains of the mirror shone like a warning that the world he had entered obeyed its cruel laws. He approached the place where the shadow had disappeared. Only a black spot remained on the ground, slowly dissolving in the air. His thoughts were confused. What was the truth and what was a trap? He gripped the old phone tighter in his hands. This object became not only a key to the past, but also a reminder of his duty. Suddenly, a slight rustling was heard from the darkness. He turned around, and in front of him again appeared the carousel, which had been destroyed before. Now it rotated, and each seat was occupied by a childlike figure. They slowly shook their heads, staring blankly at him. "You have come again," said one of them, in a voice that was almost inaudible, like a whisper from a deep abyss. "What do you want?" The man felt cold drops of sweat running down his back. "Of your memories, of your hope, and of your pain," answered the other figure, whose smile looked like it had been carved into a stone face. "You have to save me, brother. Lift me up from here." The man came closer. He felt his eyes fill with tears. It was his sister, or what was left of her. His hand trembled as he reached out, trying to touch her. At that moment, everything around froze in deathly silence. Her eyes, which were full of fear, changed for a moment. They became dark, angry and piercingly sharp. "You trusted me, brother," she whispered, and her hand gripped his wrist with a force that was unnatural for such a frail figure. "Now you belong to us." Darkness, like a living creature, surrounded his body, forcing him to fall to his knees. The man felt something cold creep into his mind, filling his consciousness with terror and doubt. He tried to fight, but his strength was leaving him with every passing second. "No, I won't give up," he whispered, concentrating all the remnants of his will. At the same moment, something appeared again on the edge of consciousness, the shadow he had seen earlier. She stood nearby, motionless, but her presence gave him strength. The man realized that it wasn't just darkness, it was something that was trying to help him, albeit in a terrible way. "Break their bond," the shadow said, and the man felt a faint glimmer of hope. He needed to find a way to free his sister, and himself, from this trap. Darkness gripped him tightly, entwining every muscle and penetrating his thoughts like a cold fog. The man felt his strength disappear, and the voices in his head whispered fears and despair. But somewhere deep inside, a small fire remained, a memory of the sister he wanted back. It was his beacon in this ocean of horror. He focused on this light, remembering the moments of their childhood, carefree games, laughter and care that united them. It gave him the strength to fight even when the darkness tried to consume him. His voice trembled, but he spoke. "You will not take me. And her too." The darkness groaned, its muffled sound echoing off the walls of the labyrinth. His sister's hand that was holding him loosened her grip for a moment. Her eyes, black and bottomless, glittered with a faint light, as if she too was struggling within this trap. The man made a last push, putting all his strength into his resistance. He mustered the remnants of his will and forcefully wrenched his hand from the shackles of darkness. The darkness retreated from this blow, and the sister suddenly became herself again. Her face became human, full of pain and fear. She fell to her knees, tears running down her cheeks. "You're back. You're here," she whispered, snuggling into him. "I was afraid that I would never see you." But their moment of union was quickly interrupted by the hissing of shadows that began to approach again. They gathered around, taking bizarre forms with twisted limbs and eyes that burned with rage. They were no longer playing hide and seek. They intended to take their prey. The shadow that had been standing aside stepped forward again. It seemed to become more clear and expressive, although still shrouded in darkness. "You have a choice," her voice said, low and cold. "Leave this trap with her. Or stay here forever. But it requires a sacrifice." The man looked at the shadow, then at his sister, who was holding on to him tightly. Her face was full of hope, but once again there was a shadow of fear in her eyes. He knew this might be his last chance. "What do I need to do?" he asked, bracing himself for the worst. "Give me a part of your soul," replied the shadow. "This is the power that will free her and close the path of this creature. But the price is high. You will no longer be who you were." He thought for a moment, but then remembered everything they had been through. There was no doubt in his decision. "I agree," he said, looking straight into the shadow's eyes. "I will do it." The darkness came again, but now he was not afraid. He knew that he was fighting for someone he loved, and that fight had meaning. The darkness rushed in like a mad whirlwind, entangling the man with cold and force that drained the last drops of his vital energy. He could feel a part of his soul escaping from him, enveloping the space around him. It hurt, like it was tearing his heart to pieces, but he didn't stop. He promised himself and his sister that he would save her. The light in the shadow's eyes became brighter, as if she was absorbing the sacrifice that the man gave. Figures in the darkness screamed, their cries shrill and drawn out, like voices in agony. They tried to get closer, but every step they took was stopped by an invisible field that gradually formed around the man and his sister. The sister, who was still holding his hand, began to glow with a soft light. Her eyes became clear again, and she looked at her brother with wonder and worry. "What did you do?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I promised to protect you," he answered, trying to hide his pain. "And I will, even if it's the last thing I do." His body seemed weaker, as if every muscle refused to work. The darkness receded, dissolving into the light that emanated from his victim. The figures screamed and dissolved one by one, as if disappearing into the abyss from which they had come. The shadow standing off to the side looked almost pleased. She moved closer to him until the darkness finally disappeared. "You paid the price," she said, her voice becoming more human. "The force that bound you is broken. You saved her. And maybe yourself." She turned and dissolved into thin air, leaving behind an echo and a sense of deep emptiness. The world around gradually took on normal forms. The carousel no longer spun, the mirrors no longer reflected ugly images. Only fragments that reminded of what happened. The man, exhausted, fell to his knees. His sister leaned over him, hugging and crying. She was free, but he felt that he had left a part of himself in this darkness. "He will never be the same again. We'll get out of here together," she said through tears, squeezing his hand. "I promise." He nodded, though he wasn't sure if he had the strength to get up. But the warmth of her embrace reminded him of what he did it for. They have walked through the darkness and maybe they will find the light together, even if the road is still long and dangerous. They stood up together, supporting each other, and moved through the gloomy but now quiet place that had once been a dungeon. The park was left behind, with its broken mirrors and abandoned rides that now seemed like empty remnants of past horrors. The road ahead sank in a light fog, but it was no longer so frightening. Their footsteps echoed, and although the man felt tired, the sense of threat slowly dissolved, leaving behind a calm and relief. His sister was silent, but her hand remained in his, and this simple closeness gave him new strength. After everything he had been through, her warmth was like the brightest memory that brought him back to reality. "What did you see there in the dark?" he finally asked, looking her in the eyes. She looked down for a moment, as if collecting her thoughts. "It was like a place without time and without light," she began quietly. "I was kept there for a long time, but it was empty. There was nothing there, except voices that kept whispering, trying to take away my will. I thought I would never get out." The man felt his heart tighten painfully. He saw the pain in her eyes and understood that she had experienced something unspeakable. "But you came for me," she looked at him tenderly. "You saved me." "It was my duty," he answered, trying to smile. "We always promised to be there for each other, remember?" The sister nodded and lightly squeezed his hand. They walked in silence, full of gratitude for a chance at a new life. But as they neared the park's exit, something in the air changed. A faint whisper returned, as soft as the wind rushing through the empty space around them. "We will meet again," said a voice that sounded like an echo of the terrible place they had left. "You'll both pay for it." The man turned, but saw nothing. The darkness seemed to recede, but the feeling of its presence still lingered somewhere on the edge of his consciousness, like an invisible shadow that would always be with him. They continued on their way, step by step, feeling the light slowly dispel the darkness that remained in their hearts. And while they knew their past would always be with them, the road ahead lay full of possibilities and the hope of a new beginning. Eventually, they left the park, leaving behind darkness and ominous memories. The light from the street lamp seemed warmer and brighter than ever. They stood on the threshold of the real world, which seemed so familiar and at the same time new. The sister, trembling, inhaled fresh air, as if freeing herself from a nightmare. "We're back," she whispered, as if convincing herself. "Yes," the man nodded. "But this is only the beginning." They moved forward in silence, and the man could feel how the remnants of fear that tormented them were slowly fading away. But, deep inside, he knew that all this left a mark on him, like a shadow that would always be a part of him. However, he decided that he would not allow the darkness to take over his life again. Soon they reached the house in which they grew up. His threshold was for them a symbol of safety and memories that once brought joy. The sister carefully stepped onto the porch and opened the door. Inside, everything was the same as before her disappearance, as if time had stopped in this cozy corner of their lives. They went into the hall, where there were old photographs on the shelves. The sister held up one of them, a portrait of them as children, in which they were hugging each other, laughing. This picture was like a reminder that even after all the horrors they had been through, there was something real about them that no darkness could destroy. "You've always been my protector," she said, looking at him warmly. "And today you saved me again." "We saved each other," he corrected, smiling. "It seems to me that all this was not for nothing." She nodded, still holding the photo. Their silence was filled with understanding and peace, and now all they had to do was move forward, leaving the past behind. Suddenly, the man felt a light touch on his shoulder, barely noticeable, like a breath of wind. He turned around, but there was no one behind him. He thought he heard a distant whisper for a moment, but it quickly disappeared, dissolving into the silence of the night. "It's over," he said, dispelling the last doubts. But as they hugged, his gaze stopped at the mirror in the hallway. For a moment he thought he saw a shadow watching them in the dark depths of the reflection. She stood there like an invisible witness of their happiness, and barely perceptibly bowed her head, as if in farewell. And, although they broke free from her chains, the man understood. Some shadows remain forever, reminding that the past will always be a part of them. But now he was ready to accept it, and move on. A few months later, the life of the brother and sister began to return to normal. They found solace in ordinary things, rebuilt their relationship, and gradually began to rediscover the simple joys of life for each other. In the evenings, they talked about their childhood memories, planned the future and even laughed, almost as before. But from time to time something strange disturbed this peace. Sometimes the brother noticed how a familiar dark figure flickered in the reflection of a window or a mirror. She was unobtrusive, as if she was just watching from afar, and every time she disappeared as soon as he paid attention to her. The sister also had the feeling that something was following her in the shadows, especially at night, when everything was surrounded by darkness. She didn't say it out loud so as not to disturb her brother, but her dreams sometimes brought her back to the place where she was once imprisoned. One day, when they were walking in the park, the sister suddenly stopped. She looked at her brother with worry in her eyes. "Did you ever feel that something remained with us?" she whispered. The brother nodded. He understood that the past would not let them go so easily. "Yes," he answered quietly. "But these are just shadows. They can't hold us anymore." "I hope you're right," she sighed, trying to smile, though there was a hint of concern in her eyes. That evening they sat together on the porch and watched the sunset. Her sister laid her head on his shoulder and they sat in silence, enjoying the peace and warmth of the evening. It seemed that the darkness that had once enveloped them had no more power. But when the sun finally hid behind the horizon, the brother heard a soft whisper that seemed familiar to him. He listened carefully, and in that silence he heard an almost inaudible voice saying, "I will always be there." The brother felt goosebumps, but did not allow himself to be frightened. He knew that these shadows, although they had left a mark on his life, no longer had power over him. They would always be somewhere near, like echoes of the past, but now he knew that he had the strength to live on. His sister looked at him and he met her gaze. There was complete agreement and understanding between them, which was not there before. They both realized what was left behind, but now they could move forward together. And, although the shadows of the past will always remain somewhere nearby, they no longer scare them. It was their victory over fear, over darkness, over the past. They chose the light and chose the life that awaited them ahead.